Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Beitzah daf Lamed Daled. We are going to begin on the bottom of Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. Ein moitzin es or. So we said my time and mishum dekamoyel b'yomtiv, that a person is not allowed to originate with any of these different types of items to be able to make a fire because of an issue of moilet. And then we continue with the last part of our Mishnah. Then molavdin eser afoyim. A person is not allowed to take roof tiles and warm them up in order to roast upon them. So on this, the Gemara asks, my koavid, what exactly is the problem over here? What is this person doing that he cannot do this on Yom Tov? So Amar Rabba Babrachana Amar Rav Yochanan Hacha B'Rafayim Chadashim Askinan. Here these tiles are actually new. Mipnei, as we continue to Lamed Amud Aleph, Shetzarech Lebadkan. A person needs to examine them, says Rashi. Im yochol kabel lavoina, if it's actually able to withstand this level of heat. Hilkach, b'yom tov lo. You're not allowed to do this on Yom Tov, because dilma pakoi, maybe they'll actually crack and break, and then bishtachech detarach deloit tzarach. It'll turn out that you end up doing something not for tzarach Yom Tov. And therefore, one is not allowed to use these new ones because we don't know what's going to end up happening with them. Okay. The Amrullah, and some say, not because Shesarach Labakim, you have to examine them, rather than Neshetzarach Lechasmon. So Rashi says that means Lakashoisam, that you're going to make them very, very hard. And skipping to the end of the Rashi, Kivan, the Behesach Zed Nasa Kli Aser. Because what you're actually doing is you're making it into a kli, and that one is not allowed to do on Yom Tov. Now with that, we're now going to continue with a seemingly unrelated topic of the dinim of treifos, which we've learned in the Masechtas Chulin. Tanat Hasan. When it comes to darsa, an animal that was stepped on or trampled on, Rashi says, Adam Shadaris al Ha'of, or Shazarku, the chavol, the kaisel, a person tramples on a bird or throws it onto a wall. O shetarpa b'kaisel, as we just said. O shiratzatza behema, or let's say it was severely wounded. Umafracheses, and now this animal behema umafracheses, and this animal is shaking. Because it's shaking so much, it's not even able to stand up on its own. So what we do is we wait for a 24-hour period of time, and then b'shachta kshera, and at that point if you shachta, it's kosher. So you skip toward the end of this lengthy Rashi. One of the issues is what's called risuki evarim. We're concerned of banging of the limbs, and when a person would shake this animal, that it would not be able to stand because it has potentially the level of treifo risuki evarim. So she avareha misparkin kulon. Basically, the limbs are all removed and disjointed. Now, b'apapi shein roishim nicker. It's not so recognizable by just looking at the animal. V'zehu simana im shehasam eisel eis b'yadua shlo nisraktu evareha. If you wait for 24 hours and that animal is still alive, then you know that it hasn't reached that level of risik ivarim. It wasn't actually damaged to that extent. So that's the reason why, to avoid risuki ivarim, one has to wait 24 hours, and if it's still alive and fine, then in fact the animal is kosher. And on this, the Gemara continues, Rabbi Lezer, Bar Yana Misham Rabbi Lezer, Ben Antignus, Sricha Bedika, you also need to do an examination. So Rashi says, on the top part of the Rashi, Kishahasam Eisel Eis Nami, even if you waited for 24 hours, that's not enough. Sricha Bedika Lachashchita. You also need to do an additional bedika, Shema Nishtabru Roiv Solaseha. So you have to see if, let's say, the majority of its ribs were broken, or Nishbra Hashedra, or the spinal column was broken, Benissa Kachutshula, or it was snapped, O Echamishar Mini Trephus, any of the other forms of trephus. So the way to make sure an animal is not a treifa, we know you have to do an examination. So when it comes to Risuki Evarim, you don't have to do a Bedika, you just have to wait 24 hours. But according to this opinion, in order to avoid the issue of treifa, you also have to do an examination. So, Balmini Rab Yirmi and Rab Zera, Mahu Shachta b'Yomtiv. What is the din if a person shechs it on Yom Tov? Says Rashi, Mi chayshinan hoyel b'sricha b'dika yiselud ba'reyosa. Are we concerned that after you shecht it, and then you now do a b'dika, and you'll end up seeing that there's something wrong with this animal, now you can't eat it, and it ends up being that you shechted it for no reason. So as the Gemara continues, Mi maksakinan reyosa b'Yom Tov olo. Do we consider this to be a reyosa, that there is something probably or possibly wrong with this animal, that because there's something wrong with this animal, since it was banged up, maybe you shouldn't shecht it because you may discover that it actually is not fit for Yom Tov. So Amrulei Tanina, we can actually answer this question, believe it or not, with the part of our Mishnah about the tiles. And it's an unbelievable connection that the Gemara thinks to make. Ein Malabnin Eserafoim Litzlois Behen. So we mentioned at the end of the Mishnah that a person is not allowed to take tiles and to basically use them to cook with them. So what are you doing wrong? What's the problem with that? So we established, we're talking about these new tiles because you need to do a bedika. So again, maybe, as we said, we're chayish that maybe they were all cracked, and therefore you ended up causing a problem because you ended up doing all this effort for no reason. So because of that, perhaps we should also say you shouldn't shecht this animal, because maybe when you do the bedika, you're also going to find the same thing. So maybe it's a raya from our Mishnah that you should not shecht such an animal. So Malay Anan b'nei chasman masninan law. It has to do with when you heat it up, as we said, you're completing it and making it into a kli. It may not necessarily be because of the bedika. It has to do with the fact you're making it into a kli. That's why there was two answers. So according to the second shot, then you would say, fine, when it comes to the tile, you're not allowed to use it because you're making it into a kli. However, when it comes to an animal, even though there's a reyes on the animal, we could still possibly do the shchita. Let's look at question 12. So as we said, so we wanted to be able to bring a raya whether or not you're allowed to shech this animal on Yom Tov from the case of our Mishnah, whether a person is allowed to use these tiles, and we said you're not allowed to use these new tiles, and we thought it's because tzarech lebadkan, and we said no, mipnei shetzarech lechasman. That's the reason why, and therefore maybe one is allowed to shech, which was question 12. So this is how he says, boil mishata medetnan, ein malavnes harafoim, and we said it's referring to these new tiles, and they may crack, and you did a tircha shlo tzarech achanami maksakin and reyasa dilma timsa treifa. We said no, the reason of our Mishnah is kiidach lishnam and nishasarech lahasman devadi iser shavi manahu, because in that case you're making to a kli, and therefore that's where the problem lies. Okay, let's continue. Tanya. Echad maybe as a orv, echad maybe as a eitzim, the echad shaifas as a kedera. So we're talking about a person does all of the different acts for cooking, or in this case, what if you have different people doing different things? One brings the fire, one brings the wood. The echad shaifas as a kedera. One puts the pot onto the stove. The echad maybe as a mayim, one brings the water. The echad neisel l'seichel table, and one puts in spices. The echad megas, and one mixes it up with a spoon. So kulan chayavim, all of them are chayiv. Says Rashi, why are you chayiv? Maybe as a or mishum maviras hagachelas. The one who brings the fire has violated because he's lighting up the coals, and it continues to discuss them. For example, nice and mayim atavlin umegas, the one who brings water and the spices, the mixer, mishum mavashal, because he's cooking. Shi'afu ab malacha, that's considered to be an abalacha. So all these different things, one is obviously not allowed to do in Shabbos to be chayiv for it. Ayavo sanya, but we learned elsewhere, achrein chayiv, only the last person should be chayiv. The kulan patu, and everyone else should be pater. Lo kasha. Had the icy or mikara, had the icy or lubaso. It depends when the fire came. Says Rashi, If, let's say, the fire came at the beginning, then kul avdi maisa, then everyone did something at the end. But if, let's say, you put in spices into an empty pot, into a pot which is cold, and only at the end did someone bring the fire, so says Rashi, Ihu de Amad, only he did something wrong, but Anachul Adi Midi, everyone else didn't do anything wrong. Now, Pishal Makulhu Kuladi Maisa. I can understand, again, if the fire came first, everyone else did something which was an Amalacha. El Shaifas as a Gedera, Maika Ovid, just placing it onto a stove, what did he do? So Amarab Shimon ben Lakish, Hachbe Gedera Chadash Askinan, here we're talking about a new pot, Mishum Laban Rafim Naguba. Just like as we mentioned about the new tiles, he's completing a kli by putting it there. Tanurban. Tanur v'kirayim, ovens and stoves, which are chadash, which are new. Harihin kechol hakalim, they're just like any other kalim hanitolim that a person is allowed to move around. Rashi says b'shabes, b'chatzer, dechazol mesav b'gavai humidi, abel ein sachin oisam shemen. A person is not allowed to smear oil on the oven. The ein toshin oiso b'maklis. A person also is not allowed to smooth it out with some type of a nice cloth. The ein mafigin oisam b'tzainin. One cannot cool it off with cold water. And Rashi says v'kula mishum the masakin mana. All these different ways of fixing up the kli. You can't do this today. L'chasma, and again, it's in order to strengthen the walls. The mishvil afos harizem mutter. If, let's say, a person cooled it off in order to be able to bake with it, then it is not an issue. Says Rashi, l'hafiga, if bishvil afos, in order to bake with it, shehusku harbe, you're doing a lot of cooking, the chayshish shlotisari if a pas mutter, and you're concerned that the bread should not burn, then it is mutter. Obviously, this is referring to on Yom Tov. Tanur moilgin esaroish vesaragalim. A person could, Rashi says, bereis can heat up in hot water the head, the legs, person's head, their feet, umahavvin oisin ba'or, and you can singe them in fire. Aval ein toiflin oisam becharsis. A person is not allowed to, Rashi says, to put, in order to remove one's hair, Mahasir Sa'aron, you cannot therefore put it in lime, Vulubadama, or some type of earth, again, which causes this a little bit seed, like a plaster. Being Geizin Aisan, Bimisparayim, a person cannot shear with scissors. Again, it looks like what you're doing is, you're doing it for the purpose of the hair. Being Geizin as Hayerek, Betispaitis. Also, a person cannot cut vegetables. Rashi says Hayerka Tolish, even though they're detached. Sheshbo Rashi on. Let's say they have leaves on the top, so you're not allowed to cut them with scissors. The Mandachazi Summer Shaloktan Hayoim. It'll give the appearance like maybe you pluck them today, because it looks like you're doing all these actions which are really something you would do right after you would remove it from the ground. So therefore, you're not allowed to use that. Again, the in goysen is yerek when vesper shaloi abel maskin es ha cornus es haach biois. However, a person is, as Rashi says, take the cornus va'ach biois, which are mini rakos and different types of vegetables, shish tarich l'sikainan, which is difficult to prepare them. Those you are allowed to be masakin, because people will know that because it's a difficulty to do, probably they weren't just taken today, but rather from before. Masikin v'oifen b'porni, and you could cook them up in a porni, which is a large oven. Chamin chamin b'antiki, and you can also warm up water in a very large water urn. However, ein oifen b'porni chadash shema tivchas. A person is not allowed to bake in a new large oven because of the concern, as we said before, it may break. Says Rashi, Aladei shechadasha, since it's new, this is nimsatar shalatzarach. As we said, by the case of the tiles and the like, we're concerned that it may not actually work. So therefore, we don't want you to do it because it may break and it owes a tir cheshul tzarach. Tarabanan. Ein noichin b'mafuach. A person is not allowed to use a bellow to blow things. Rashi is the mechzi uman oisem malacha, because that's what an uman, a regular worker, uses. And this is we're gonna end up seeing question 13. Talking about ein noichin b'mafuach. So we're gonna get to question 13 in a second. But a person is allowed to use a straw or a tube because that is not the typical use. It's not the typical instrument that's used, and therefore that's allowed to be used. Person cannot fix a spit. And a person is not allowed to sharpen it. Says Rashi, why can't you fix a spit? Udalok Rabbi Huda, either this is not like the shita of Rabbi Huda, because Rabbi Huda holds Machshir Yochel Nefesh is allowed. Inami bin Nartzam Erb Yamtiv Dever Kol. It's referring to, as we saw before, that it was actually fit, it could still be used, and therefore everyone holds that because of that it's really Tir Cheshul Tzarach. Tonaban. Ein Mafatzin Esakana. A person is not allowed to peel a reed, litzloispo maliach, in order to roast a fish. Ava mafatzin es egois b'matlas. A person is allowed to peel a nut with some type of a cloth. And we're not afraid that maybe it will cause it to tear. Says Rashi, because v'fil nikras, even if it does rip, will ifchaslan. The issue of tearing is in order to fix, because it's all when it comes to a tikkun. So therefore, the whole issue is if you rip it to fix it. But over here, it's not a problem. Okay, so now we're going to see question 13, which we already touched upon. So he says, in the staknas hashvud, you're not allowed to fix a spit. And we said, why not? After all, l'chayra, we allow Machshir Yochel Nefesh. So as we said, either this is not like it's not like Rabbi Huda, or he says like this: Ari bin Nirtzam Erev Yomtiv, that it was already somewhat okay to be used, and therefore it's Tir Cheshul Tzarach, or Rabbi Huda Machshir Shev Shal Asos Erev Yomtiv. Maybe this is something that could have been done before Yomtiv, and therefore even Rabbi Huda would hold it's not allowed. The only time Rabbi Huda's Machshir allows Machshir Yochel Nefesh is dafka in a situation where it is something in which has to be done today on Yom Tov. But if it could have been done easily on Erev Yom Tov, even Rabbi Huda holds not. Next Mishnah. Ba'oid Amar Rabbi Lezer, Omed Adam al Muksa. He says that a person is able to stand by a muksa, as we said, like in his back of his yard, as we continue to Lamed Daled Mabeis, Erev Shabbos B'Shvius. And it's Erev Shabbos. We'll discuss the significance of why it's Erev Shabbos and the Shemitah year. Now, normally, as Rashi says, She'ein Meiser Noid Bo. When we're dealing with Shvius on the 7th year, there's no din of taking up Trumas and Meisers. Ve'ein Mechusar El Hazmana. The only thing that's missing as far as it being able to be consumed, it's not Tevel, is Hazmana, it's being designated for food. V'hu adin V'moiser V'shar Shnei Shavua. Really, it's like that for the rest of the year. Etc. Okay, let's continue in the Mishnah. A person says, I'm going to take the food from that area tomorrow. So therefore, he does hazmana, he prepares it, and that's good enough. He actually has to mark off which fruit that he actually wants to take. It's v'yomer mikan v'ad kan, from here until here. It's not enough for him just to make this general declaration, but he has to be more specific. Tanan Hasan. Tinaikus shitamnu te'enim. Let's say you have a kid or a bunch of children who hid their figs because they love figs, and they hid them at Erev Shabbos. The shachu, they forget about it. Lo isru, and they didn't take off the meiser. Motzi Shabbos lo yachal alim kein isru. It's necessary to take off the meiser even though it's Motzei Shabbos. So, When it comes to achilas arai, Rashi explains a person is allowed to eat even without taking off the meiser. However, as Rashi brings down from Baba Metzia, achilas Shabbos chashuva the arai shula harihu keva, that even though normally something which is an achilas arai like te'anim, like figs, but nonetheless once Shabbos comes, it's considered to be an achilas keva, and therefore you have to separate meiser from them. Now, since it was designated for Shabbos, so really meiser should have been taken off. But now it's Motzei Shabbos, no one ever ate them, and now it's a weekday. Doesn't matter. Because they went through this time in which it was Shabbos, Shabbos is koiveya, this food, to become achilas keva, and that's the reason why meiser needs to be taken. That's point number one. The Tanan we also learned, hamaver te'enim b'chatzeroi, a person, let's say, takes figs and puts them into his courtyard, liktzos, in order to dry them up. In other words, he did not consider them completed yet. There was not Gemar Malacha. So banav b'nei beiso eichlin mehen, arai uveturin. They're still allowed to eat them, as Rashi says. V'shaminin mina b'davar shenigmar malachto Shabbos kovas l'meiser below re'is pnei abayis. So there's actually, normally you would have to bring it into your house, but when it comes to Shabbos, as we said, even achilas arai, it doesn't have to. It's once it's Shabbos, it's considered achilas keva, and as long as it was Gemar and Malacha, it was completed, it was ready to be eaten, then even if it didn't actually get into your house, still that's the din. However, over here, there was not Gemar Malacha. Because it was not completed, because you were going to dry them out, therefore, if someone would take them at that point, so the din is that it's still considered to be potter, because it was not a davar shenigmar malachta. So, Ba'minei Rab and Rab Nachman, Shabbos Mahu, Shetikva Muksa, L'Maiser V'Davar Shlo Nigmar Malachto. What's the din when it comes to Shabbos? Now, normally we said that when it comes to Shabbos, it turns achilas arai into achilas keva. The question is, does it also take something which is not Gemar Malacha and considers it as though it is now Gemar Malacha? Again, normally, as we said, if you would put these figs out on a Tuesday to dry, that's not Gemar Malacha, because you were waiting for them to dry, and therefore they're potter from meiser at that point. However, maybe on Shabbos we say no. Even though it's not Gemar Malacha, it's still chayav. Just like even though it's achilas arai, it's chayav. Mi amrinan kivan dechsev karasol l'Shabbos hainig kava defil b'davar shlo nigmar malachta. Maybe we say that even in something which is not completed its work, nonetheless it's still considered to be Gemar in a sense that it's Shabbos, and therefore it's chayav. Well, b'davar shenigmar malachta kava b'davar shlo nigmar malachta lo kava. Even though there's this stringency when it comes to Shabbos, changing achilas arai to achilas keva, maybe that doesn't work by changing, because it's Shabbos, something which is not Gemar Malacha, as though it's Gemar Malacha, now it's Chayav and Meiser. So Malay, Shabbos Kovas, the Shabbos actually does establish it, Bein B'davar Shnigmar Malachta, Bein B'davar Shlo Nigmar Malachta. Even when it comes to something which is not Nigmar Malachta, it doesn't make any difference. Shabbos does establish it. Omerle ve'ema Shabbos t'chatzer. Why don't we say Shabbos is just like the courtyard? Ma chatzer enu kavas ela b'davar shenigmar malachta. It's only when it's completed. Now Shabbos lo kava el b'davar shenigmar malachta. Why don't we compare Shabbos to the chatzer? Similarly, limud arachu b'yadenu. There's this lengthy discussion in our hands. Shabbos kovas ben b'davar shenigmar malachta ben b'davar shenigmar malachta. As I said, that is the din. We do not compare it to a chatzer. Rather, the din simply is that even though it's not completed, these fruits, nonetheless, it is chayav and meiser when Shabbos comes. Omer Mar Zutra Bered Rav Nachman Afanam and Tanina. We also have a Mishnah that supports this concept. The Odam Rebbe Lezer, our Mishnah. What did he say? Oimid Adam al Hamuksa Erev Shabbos B'Shvius B'Chul. As our Mishnah said, that a person could stand and designate certain fruits to be able to be eaten. Now it mentions that it's the Shemitah year. Taima the Shvius. The reason why this is allowed is because it's Shemitah. The Labari Sirahu. Because it is not Mechuyev and Meiser. Because on Shvius there's no din of taking off Meiser, Chumas and Meisers. However, which is Mashma, Habishar Shnei Shvua, if it was on any other day, any other year, Hachinami de Aser. My time, Lamishim de Shabbos Kava. Even though these fruits are not Gemar Malachto, nonetheless, you would not be able to do this. It must be our Mishnah is telling us Davki was on the Shvius where it's not mechuyev in meiser. However, if it was any other year, even though it's not Gemar Malacha, the fact that it's Erev Shabbos and now Shabbos is going to come, he would not be able to do this. So it's a riot to what we're saying. Gemara says, "Lo, Shani Hasam, it's different over there. Kivandi Omer Mikanani Oichel L'Machar." Since he said this is exactly what I'm going to eat tomorrow, he was specific. Kabel Leilel. Actually, that was what was Koiveyet. So even though it's true, normally maybe that's not the din, that it's considered to be koiveh, to be mechuyev in meiser, but since you designated it, so therefore it's considered to be also. Just like those kids who designated those figs for Shabbos by putting them away. So it's the same idea. Yihachi, my area Shabbos, I feel b'chol nami. So why Shabbos? This is even during the week. If he designated it, he designated it. So he's making it keva. Kamashwan, the tevel muchanhu etzel Shabbos. It's coming to tell you that when it comes to tevel, it's still considered to be muchan regarding Shabbos. Shim aber v'siknan mesukan. That even though one is not supposed to fix it on Shabbos, but nonetheless, if one does, then it is mesukan. Okay, we're going to stop there. Let's see a couple of questions. Question 14. Oimid adam al muksa erev Shabbos b'shvius. Remember mekanin oichel. So ma kavel meiser b'shar shanim. How do we say that? What exactly does this mean? So that it's koideya. So question 14. Oh, command Yermer Shabbos kovas meiser. Either it's coming to tell you that Shabbos is koideya for meiser. Oh, b'davar shel nigmar malach. Af b'davar shel nigmar malachto. Even though it's not complete. Oh, shenikvul meiser mishum de'achshva b'dibura shenikra achila. Maybe it's dafka because you actually said that it is specifically for food, and you're designating it as food, and therefore because you did it that way, that's what's kovas, that's what establishes it, in which normally you're right, any other year would be chayiv in meiser, but because it's shvius, you're not chayiv in meiser. However, it's not necessarily a raya when it comes to Gemar Malacha that would be the din. Ta 9. Tanya echad mevi esaur. Ha'im hashayfes esagedera chayiv. Umadua. Why? What did this person do? The one who took this pot and just simply put it down. So as we said in the Gemara, mishum dekom b'kedera chadasha. That's a new pot. Chayiv dehavili kilibin rafim. It's just like those new tiles. Dehavili masakin mana, and that's considered to be like fixing up this kli. That was Ta 9. Is it Keder Kadashas Kina Mishum Liban Rafoim Naguba? Ta 10. Oimid Adam al Mukser Shabbos B'Shvius Omer Mekanani Neitel Madua Mishar Shanim. How come during the rest of the years? This is question 10. The rest of the years, As Mishum Tevel Holo Nigma Malachtov. What is the reason why? So according to Belezer, Shabbos Kovas Afil Shal Nigma Malachtov. Rabbanan Mishum Shenemar Mikanani Oichel Ani Oichel Kavalon. So it's really the same question as we said before. The question is, why do we say in our Mishnah that this is the din? And the answer is either because since it's Shabbos, it's koivas, even for someone who's Gemar Malacha, and the only reason why you could eat it is because it's shvius and you can't, and there's no chiv and meiser. Any other year you wouldn't be able to do it because it would now become chiv and meiser, or because you're kovas, because you actually specifically designated it, which is the reason why. TB 11. So these are the things. Let's see if we did all of them. Of course, one of them is Shabbos. Fine. Shabbos is one, and we're going to see the other ones on tomorrow's daf. Adkan.